Okay, part 6, chapter 8. When he went in to see Sonia, dusk was beginning to fall. All day Sonia had been waiting for him in a state of terrible excitement. She and Dunya had waited together. Dunya had come to her that morning, having remembered Vidrelgov's remark of the day before that Sonia knew about it. We shall not convey to the reader the details of the conversation or the tears of both women or how intimate they became. From that rendezvous, Dunya had carried away at least one consolation, and that was that her brother would not be alone. It was to her, Sonia, he had gone first with his confession. It was in her that he had sought a human being when he had needed one. As for Sonia, she would follow him wherever fate might send him. Dunya had not asked, but had known that was how it would be. She had even looked at Sonia with a kind of reverence, at first almost embarrassing her with this feeling of reverence with which she approached her. Sonia had been almost on the point of tears. She considered herself unworthy even to glance at Dunya. Dunya's fair image that she had bowed to her with such courtesy and respect at the time of their first meeting in Raskolnikov's lodging, had remained in her soul forever as one of the most beautiful and ineffable visions of her life. At last Dunya had run out of patience and had left Sonia in order to await her brother in his lodging. She kept thinking that was where he would make for first. Left alone, Sonia at once began to torment herself with fear at the thought that perhaps he might really commit suicide. The same fear haunted Dunya. All day long, however, they had used all kinds of arguments to reassure each other that could not possibly be, and for the time they had spent together had been calmer. But now, no sooner had they parted than both the one and the other had begun to think only of that. Sonia kept remembering how Svidrigailov had told her the day before that there were two roads open to Raskolnikov, Vladimir, or she was also familiar with his vanity, his arrogance, his self-pride and unbelief. Is it really only cowardice and the fear of death that are keeping him alive? She thought at last in despair. Meanwhile, the sun was going down. She stood sadly at the window, staring out of it fixedly. But from this window all that was visible was the brown main wall of the neighboring building. At last, when she had arrived at a complete conviction that the unhappy man was dead, he walked into her room. A cry of joy burst from within her. Taking a close look at his face, however, she suddenly went pale. "Yes, that's right," Raskolnikov said with an ironic look. "I've come for your crosses, Sonia. After all, it was you who told me to go to the crossroads. What's the matter? Now that it's come to the point, have you got cold feet?" Sonia was staring at him in consternation. This tone of voice seemed strange to her. A cold shiver passed throughout her body, but a moment later she realized that both tone and words were something he was affecting. There was also the way he was talking to her, looking away at an angle as though he were trying to avoid gazing her straight in the eye. "You see, Sonia, I've decided that it may be for my own good to do it this way. There's a certain circumstance involved in all this. Oh, it would take me too long to tell you about it, and in any case, there's no point. Do you know the only thing that makes me angry? Is that all those stupid brutes will immediately surround me with their ugly mugs, gawp right at me, ask me their stupid questions, which I'll have to answer. They'll point their fingers at me. Pah! But you know, I shan't go to Porfiry. I'm fed up with him. No, I'd rather go and see my friend Gunpowder. I'll give him a real surprise, make a bit of a stir in my own way, but I must have some sang-froid. I've grown far too acrimonious of late. Would you believe it? I nearly took my fist to my sister just now for turning round to look at me one last time. This state of mind's enough to make a swine of one. Ah, what's become of me? Well, then, where are they, your crosses?" It was as if he were not his own man. He was not even able to stay in the same place for a single moment, nor could he concentrate his attention on a single object. His thoughts kept leaping ahead, one after the other. His speech wandered, and his hands were trembling slightly. Without saying anything, Sonia produced two crucifixes from a drawer, a cypress one and a copper one, crossed herself, crossed him, and hung the cypress crucifix around his neck. "I see, this is meant to symbolize my taking up the cross. He, as though I hadn't done enough suffering already. I get the cypress one, as befits a member of the common people. You get the copper one. It's Lizavetta's, isn't it? Let's see it. Is that the one she was wearing at the moment in question? I know of another two crosses, a silver one and one with an icon. I threw them on to the old woman's corpse that day. They're really the ones I ought to have now. They're the ones I ought to put on. But actually, I'm talking a lot of nonsense. I'm forgetting the matter in hand. For some reason, my mind's grown distracted. You see, Sonia, I really came in order to warn you, so you know. Well, that's all. Yes, that's the only reason I came. Though actually I thought I'd say more. After all, you yourself wanted me to go and give myself up, so now I shall. I'll go to jail, and your desire will be fulfilled. So why are you crying? You as well. Stop it. That's enough. Oh, how tedious all this is. An emotion had, however, taken root in him. He felt a pang at his heart as he looked at her. Why this girl? Why is she crying? He wondered. What am I to her? What's she crying for? Why is she getting me ready for the journey? Like mother or Dunya, she wants to be my nanny. Please make the sign of the cross over yourself. Please say at least one prayer, Sonia asked him in a trembling, timid voice. Oh, very well, certainly, as you please. And it comes straight from the heart, Sonia, straight from the heart. Though really he wanted to say something quite different, he crossed himself several times. Sonia caught up her shawl and slipped it over her head. It was a green draped de dame shawl, probably the one Marmeladov had mentioned that time, the family one. The thought occurred to Raskolnikov for a moment, but he did not ask about it. He really had begun to feel that his mind was growing alarmingly distracted and almost indecently anxious. This frightened him. He also suddenly found shocking the realization that Sonia intended to go with him. What are you doing? What business do you have going there? Stay here, stay. I'll go alone, he snapped, irritable with apprehension, almost wild with anger. He strode towards the door. We can't have a whole retinue down there. We can't have a whole retinue, R-E-T-I-N-U-E, down there, he muttered as he went out. Sonia remained in the middle of the room. He had not even said goodbye to her. He had already forgotten her. A single gnawing and rebellious doubt seethed within his soul. But is this really right? Is this the right thing to do? He found himself thinking as he went down the stairs. Can I really not still call it all off and make amends for everything and not go? But even so he went. He had suddenly felt once and for all that there was no point in asking any questions. As he emerged onto the street, he remembered that he had not said goodbye to Sonia, that she was still standing in the middle of the room wearing her green shawl, not daring to move a limb because of the way he had shouted. And he paused for an instant. In that split second, a certain thought flooded him with brilliant light, as though it had been waiting to finally overwhelm him. Why did I come and see her just now? I told her it was on business. What business? There was no business involved whatsoever. To tell her I was going, what of it? A fine sort of pretext that was. What was it then? Do I love her? I don't really do. I don't really, do I? I mean, I chased her away just now as if she were a dog. What about those crucifixes? Did I really want them from her? Oh, how low I've fallen. No, it was her tears I wanted. I wanted to see her fright, to watch her heart ache and torment itself. I needed to have something to catch on to. I wanted to play for time, to watch another human being, and I dared to have that kind of self-confidence. And I dared to have that kind of self-confidence, those kind of dreams about myself, beggar that I am, nunnity that I am, villain. He was walking along the embankment of the canal and had not much further to go. When he reached the bridge, however, he paused and suddenly set off across it, breaking his route, and made his way up to the Haymarket. Greedily he looked around to right and to left, scrutinizing each object intensely and unable to focus his attention on anything. It was all slipping away. In just a week or a month I'll be carted off somewhere on one of those convict transports, and how will I see this canal then? Will I remember this? Flashed through his head. Take this sign here. How will I read these same letters then? Look, they've spelt it. Company. Well, let me remember that A, that letter A. To look at it, and look at it in a month's time. The very same A. How will I look at it then? What will I be feeling and thinking? Oh God, how base they will all seem. All these present concerns of mine. Of course they'll seem curious in their own way. Ha 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 ha. What am I thinking of? I'm turning into a child, boasting to myself. But why am I telling myself off? Ugh, how they shove. Look at that fat fellow. He must be a German who shoved me just now. Wow, does he know whom he shoved? There's a woman with a baby begging for alms. It's interesting that she should think I'm more fortunate than herself. All right, then, I'll give her something just for amusement's sake. I say, I still have a 5-kopeck piece in my pocket. Where did that come from? Here you are. Take that, little mother. May God preserve you, sir, the voice of the beggar woman said in the tone of a lament. He entered the Haymarket. He found it unpleasant, very unpleasant to rub shoulders with people, but he had purposely gone to the place where he would see the greatest number of them. He would have given the whole world to be alone, but he himself sensed that not for one moment would he be on his own. In the crowd, a drunk man was causing a disturbance. He kept trying to dance, but collapsed to the ground. He was surrounded by a ring of people. Raskolnikov forced his way through the crowd, looked at the drunk man for a few moments, and then suddenly gave a curt and abrupt laugh. and abrupt laughed. A moment later, he had already forgotten about him, did not even see him, even though he was looking at him. At last, he moved away, not even conscious of where he was, but when he reached the center of the square, he was suddenly overtaken by a spasm. A single sensation that mastered him straight away, seized hold of him entirely, both in mind and in body. He had suddenly recalled Sonia's words. Go up to the crossroads, bow to the people, kiss the earth because you have sinned against it too, and tell the whole world out loud, I'm a murderer. And remembering them, he had begun to tremble all over, and such a crushing weight did he now carry from the hopeless despair and anxiety of all this recent time, and especially of the last few hours, that he fairly leaped at the chance of this pure, new, complete sensation that suddenly hit him like an epileptic seizure. A single spark began to glow within his soul, and suddenly it engulfed everything like fire. Everything in him instantly grew soft, and the tears came spurting out. He fell to the ground where he stood. He kneeled in the middle of the square, bowed down on the earth, and kissed that dirty earth with pleasure and happiness. He got up and bowed down a second time. My God, that chap's had a few, a young lad beside him observed. There was a burst of laughter. What is it, lads? Is that he's off to Jerusalem with all his kids and he's saying goodbye to his motherland, bowing to one and all, kissing the capital city of St. Petersburg and its foundations, a slightly drunken artisan supplied. He's still a young lad, too. A gent by the looks of it, someone observed in a sagacious voice. You don't know who's a gent and who isn't these days. All these comments and arguments had an inhibiting effect on Raskolnikov, and the words, I've committed a murder, which had possibly been about to escape from his lips, died within him. He calmly endured all these shouts, however, and without looking round, walked straight down the lane in the direction of the police bureau. A certain vision floated before him as he went, but it caused him no astonishment. He had already had a premonition that this was how it was going to be, as, on the Haymarket, he had bowed to the ground for the second time. Turning round to the left, some 50 paces away from him, he had seen Sonia. She had been hiding from him behind one of the wooden huts on the square. So she had observed the whole of his Via Dolorosa. Raskolnikov felt and understood at that moment, once and for all, that Sonia was now with him forever and would follow him even to the ends of the earth, wherever his fate might decree. His heart turned over, but here he had reached the fateful spot. He entered the courtyard in fairly good spirits. It was necessary to go up to the third floor. It'll take me a while to get up there, he thought. On the whole, it seemed to him that the fateful moment was still a long way off, that he still had a lot of time left, that there was still plenty of room for reflection. Again the same sweepings, the same eggshells on the spiral staircase, again the doors of the apartments wide open, again the same kitchens from which came fumes and stink. Raskolnikov had not been here since that day. His legs lost sensation and sagged under him, but they moved. He paused for a moment in order to regain his breath, in order to recover himself, in order to go in like a human being. Oh, what's the point? Why bother, he thought suddenly, realizing what he was doing. If I must drain this cup, then surely nothing will make any difference. The more loathsome, the better. Though his mind at that moment passed the figure of Ilya Petrovitch, Gunpowder. Do I really have to go and see him? Can it be someone else? Can I go and see Nikodym Fomitch? Turn back right now and go and see the superintendent himself at his apartment. At least it would all go off in less official surroundings. No, no, let it be gunpowder, let it be gunpowder. If I'm to drain it, then let me drain it all in one go. Growing cold and only just aware of what he was doing, he opened the door of the bureau. On this occasion, the place was practically deserted apart from a yard keeper and some plebeian-looking fellow. The secretary attendant did not even bother to peer out from behind his partition. Raskolnikov walked into the next room. Perhaps I can still get away without telling them, flashed through his head. Here a certain personage from among the scribes, dressed in an ordinary frock coat, was getting ready to write something at his desk. In the corner, another scribe was also setting to work. Of Zamyotov there was no sign. Needless to say, there was no sign of Nikodym Fomitch either. Isn't there anyone here? Raskolnikov asked, addressing the personage at the writing desk. Who are you looking for? Ah, by the ear unheard, by the eye unseen, but the Russian spirit, how does it go on in that fairy tale? I've forgotten. My compliments, sir, a familiar voice suddenly exclaimed. Raskolnikov gave a shudder. Before him stood Gunpowder. He had suddenly come out of the third room. This is fate personified, Raskolnikov thought. What's he doing here? Come to see us? What about? Yapped Ilya Petrovitch. He was by the look of it in a most excellent and even slightly stimulated mental condition. If it's on business, you're too early. I myself am simply here by chance. However, I shall do what I can. I will confess to you, Raskolnikov. Ah, of course, Raskolnikov. Could you really suppose I'd forgotten? Please, you mustn't think I'm such a Rodion, Rodionich, isn't it? Rodion Romanich. Yes, Rodion Romanich, Rodion Romanich. It was on the tip of my tongue, you know. I've been trying to get in touch with you for ages. I will confess to you that I was genuinely sorry we dealt with you the way we did that time. It was explained to me afterwards. I learned that you are a young literateur and even a scholar, and that, as it were, your first steps, oh, good heavens, which of our litterateurs and scholars did not begin with some eccentric first steps? My wife and I both have a deep respect for literature, and with my wife, it even takes the form of a passion. Literature and the arts. As long as the fellow's a gentleman, all the rest can be acquired by means of talent, knowledge, intellect, genius. A hat, well, what does a hat signify, for example? A hat is as plain as a pancake. I can buy it at Zimmerman's, but what lies under the hat and is covered by the hat, that I cannot buy, sir. I will confess to you that I even wanted to come and have the whole matter out with you, but I thought perhaps you, but I'm neglecting to ask, is there something you want? They say your family has arrived in town. Yes, my mother and sister. I've actually had the honor and good fortune of meeting your sister, a charming and educated person, I will confess. I was sorry you and I got so angry with each other that day. A curious incident. And as for my viewing your fainting fit that day in a certain light, it all became quite dazzlingly clear afterwards. Blind cruelty and fanaticism. I understand your indignation. Is it perhaps that you're moving your lodgings in connection with the arrival of your family? No, I simply dropped by. I came to inquire. I thought I would find Zamyotov here. Ah, yes, you and he have made friends. I've heard about it, sir. But I'm afraid Zamyotov isn't here. You've missed him. Yes, sir. We've lost Alexander Grigorievich. He left yesterday. He got a transfer, and in the process of being transferred, he fairly quarreled with us all in the most impolite manner. He's an empty-headed young whippersnapper, and that's all there is to it. One might have thought he'd have come to something. But I mean, there you have it, our resplendent youth. He says he's going to take some examination or other, but I mean, it's only so he can tell us about it and boast to us. That's how far that examination will go. I mean, he's not like you or your friend there, Mr. Razumikin. Your career lies in the field of scholarship, and you won't be brought down by failure, for you are all those charms of life, one might say. Nihilist. You're an ascetic, a monk, a recluse. What matters to you is the book, the pen, behind the ear. Your scholarly research, that's where your spirit soars. I myself do a little. Have you by any chance read Livingstone's Travels? No. I must admit I have, actually. You know, there's an awful lot of nihilists around these days. Well, I mean, it's understandable. What kind of times are these, I ask you? But you see, I thought that perhaps with you I could. I mean, you can't possibly be a nihilist. Answer me truthfully now, truthfully. No. Now come along, you can be quite open with me. You needn't feel embarrassed. It's just as though we were alone and not in here at all. One thing that duty sends, another among. One thing that duty sends, another among. Did you think I was going to say friends? No, sir, you guessed wrongly. Not friendship, but a sense of being a citizen and a human being, a sense of humaneness and love of the Almighty. I may be an official serving at my post, but I am forever obliged to be aware of the citizen and the human being in myself, and to render account. You mentioned Zamyotov just now. Zamyotov will be off causing some scandal in the French manner inside some sleazy establishment over a glass of champagne or Don wine. That's your Zamyotov for you, while I, and maybe perhaps be said, as it were, have burned with devotion and lofty feelings, and what is more, possess importance, rank, occupy a position. I'm married and have children, fulfill my duty as a citizen and a human being. But what is he, may I ask? I address you as a man who has been ennobled by education, and then again, there are far too many of these midwives around, if you want my opinion. Raskolnikov raised his eyebrows interrogatively. The things Ilya Petrovitch, who had plainly not long risen from table, was saying had been raining and rattling down before him, for most part like so many empty sounds. He had, however, absorbed the gist of some of them. He gazed with the question in his eyes, uncertain how all this was going to end. It's these girls with their hair cut short I'm talking about. The loquacious Ilya Petrovitch continued. Midwives is the name I've invented for them, and I think it's a perfectly good one. He. They get themselves into the academy and learn anatomy. Well, I ask you, if I fall ill, am I going to summon a young girl to cure me? He. Ilya Petrovitch chortled away, thoroughly content with his own witticisms. Let us assume it's caused by an immoderate thirst for enlightenment, but I mean, once a person is enlightened, that's enough. But why abuse it? Why offend decent people the way that blackguard Zamyotov does? Why did he insult me, I ask you? And then again, There have been so many of these suicides of late, you simply have no idea. People spending the last of their money and killing themselves, young girls and lads, old men. Even today, there's been a report about some gentleman who arrived in town recently. Nile Pavlich, I say, Nile Pavlich. What's the name of that gent they say shot himself over on St. Petersburg side this morning? Svidrigailov, someone replied from the other room with hoarse indifference. Raskolnikov shuddered. Svidrigailov? Svidrigailov shot himself, he exclaimed. What? You know the man? Yes, I do. He arrived in town recently. That's right, he did, after he lost his wife, a man of dissolute behavior, and he suddenly went and shot himself in such a scandalous fashion you simply have no idea. He left a few possessions of his faculties. Oh no, he left a few words in his notebook to the effect that he was dying in full possession of his faculties and requested that no one be blamed for his death. It said he had money. How was it you know him? He was a friend of mine. My sister worked in their house as a governess. My. Then you ought to be able to tell us about him. Didn't you suspect anything? I saw him yesterday. He was drinking. I knew nothing of this. Raskolnikov felt something had fallen on top of him and was weighing him down. You're looking rather pale again. We have such stuffy offices up here. Yes, it's time I was going, Raskolnikov muttered. Forgive me for troubling you. Oh, don't mention it. You're most welcome. It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad to say it. Ala Petrovich even stretched out his hand. I simply wanted to see Zamyotov. I understand, and it's been a pleasure. I'm most glad. Goodbye now, Raskolnikov smiled. He stepped outside. He was swaying. His head was going round. He could hardly tell whether he was standing upright. He began to descend the staircase, supporting himself with his right hand against the wall. He had a vague impression of some yard-keeper house-book in hand, giving him a shove as he made his way past him upstairs to the bureau, of some wretched little dog barking and barking somewhere on the ground floor, and of some woman throwing a rolling pin at it and shouting. He went down to the bottom and emerged into the courtyard. There in the yard, not far from the exit, stood the pale, utterly rigid figure of Sonia, looking at him with wild eyes. He came to a halt in front of her. There was an expression of pain and exhaustion on her face, something akin to despair. She clasped her hands together. A lost, ugly smile forced its way to his lips. He stood there for a moment, smiled ironically, then turned back and began to ascend the stairs to the bureau again. Ilo Petrovich had sat down and was rummaging through some documents. In front of him stood the Musik, who had shoved against Raskolnikov on his way up the staircase. Ah, you again. Left something? But what's the matter with you? With lips turned pale, his gaze motionless, Raskolnikov quietly walked up to him, went right up to the desk, rested one arm on it, and tried to say something, but was unable to. All that came out were some incoherent words. You're feeling faint. A chair? Here, sit on the chair. Sit down. Water. Raskolnikov lowered himself onto the chair, without, however, taking his eyes off the face of the disagreeably astonished Ila Petrovich. For a moment, they both looked at each other, waiting. Water was brought. I'm the person, Raskolnikov began. Take a drink of water. Raskolnikov brushed the water aside and quietly, in measured tones but distinctly said, I'm the person who murdered the old civil servant's widow and her sister Lizaveta that day. I did it with an axe, and I robbed them. Ilo Petrovich opened his mouth. People came running from every quarter. Raskolnikov repeated his deposition. So, that's the end of Part 6, Chapter 8. Next is the epilogue. Peace.